Hey, I'm Rachel Kugel, and this is Rachel Defends You. And today I have such a special guest. I'm so excited. It's a big get. Rick Collins, attorney, the defense lawyer for the Fit and Jacked, which I freaking love that. He is a nationally recognized authority on federal steroid law, on performance enhancing drug cases. He's written extensively on the topics of all of those types of drugs, and he's really become the foremost authority on these types of cases. He served on the Sentencing Commission for revising federal sentencing guidelines in steroid cases, and he's consulted and appeared in the 2008 documentary, Bigger, Stronger, Faster. And he just knows all there is to know about performance enhancing drugs, steroids, etc., and their kind of convergence with the criminal court system. Rick and I met in court, so we really are, we're not just out here talking about it, but we're actually in the trenches every day. We met defending real life clients in real life court, and I'm so excited to have him here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Rick, tell us first of all, like, how did you end up? I mean, I know a little bit about your background just because become friendly. And I know that you have, been sort of a regular criminal defense attorney like me, and then over the years really fell into this really cool niche that I think you've really gotten the control on in this market. Tell us, how did you end up as the lawyer for the Fit and the Jacked?
Well, first, when I saw you over at 100 Center Street, which is, where I think you practice regularly and where I practiced for 5 years, pretty much every day. I was in that building 5 years straight, handling bread and butter criminal defense cases, mostly for indigent clients. Prior to that, I was in the district attorney's office. So I was a prosecutor in the Nassau DA's office.
And you came to the side of light.
And came to the side of light, as they say. But when you first come to that side of light, you really need to build the private practice. And one way to do that, for lawyers to do that, is to do assigned counsel work. And so I did that in Manhattan, and many of the best war stories of your career will be from those assigned cases. I was feeling nostalgic when I saw you because I was in a building I hadn't been in decades, because my practice has changed. And I was looking at courtrooms and jury rails where I could remember many, many years ago delivering the summation of my life.
Yeah.
And, here it is. Now there are new lawyers standing at that rail who'll never know about that summation. And it actually made me think about all the lawyers who came before me who may have stood at that rail and delivered, litigated and argued their hearts out, sort of same place, just separated by the dimension of time. So I was feeling nostalgic that day. It was nice to be back there. I remembered so many great memories in that building. And I think that we go through different phases of life, whether it's high school or college or law school for us. And then for some, it's either legal aid or a prosecutor or an entry level legal job. And then little by little, you find the right path. And for me, as you know, Rachel, as we talked about,
well, you are fit and jacked.
Yeah. So I
you
was
have the street cred.
Yeah. So I competed as a sort of in a separate track from my professional career. I've had a very diverse life of passion. I was an actor for a while, and I've done a lot of, television and movie, low budget stuff. And but I was a competitive bodybuilder. So I came from the background of health and fitness, of diet and exercise and nutrition and training and all the discipline that comes from being a competitive bodybuilder. And I will say, and I've written an article, several columns about how I think that bodybuilding made me a better lawyer, because you really do learn lessons of perseverance and discipline and sacrifice and overcoming obstacles, whether it's an injury or an illness, whatever it is. And you really learn how to adapt and really persevere. So that was sort of my track separate from the law. like I said, I did 5 years of mostly assigned counsel work, and then gradually began to build a private practice with my partners. And over the years, and I'm not saying it was any great, imagination or foresight on my part, it really, sometimes things just happen organically. And if you just follow what you're passionate about and what you're interested in, life kind of takes you in an interesting way. And it's ironic because the year that I went into private practice, which was 1990,
Mhm.
was the same year that the United States Congress decided that anabolic steroids should be treated like heroin and cocaine and put it into the same federal statute, the Controlled Substances Act, with all these more traditional drugs of abuse. And
Mm.
suddenly you had a disconnect between the guys in the trenches, in the gyms, who were using these things with the idea that maybe they were, training aids or super vitamins or whatever, but didn't
Right.
really think of themselves as drug criminals. And now the courts, the law enforcement agents, the prosecutors, the judges, and even the defense lawyers who had no idea, there was just a complete disconnect and an information gap. And so I created a website called steroidlaw.com
Mhm.
to try to bridge that gap. And that led to me becoming a monthly columnist for a bodybuilding magazine called Muscular Development Magazine that I wrote for 25 years. That led to me writing a book called Legal Muscle, which is a book
That's a
about
great title.
the yeah, and I still have my
Right.
Legal Muscle coffee cup here, about kind of all things steroid culture, law, policy, medicine, health, etc. And so and ultimately to appear with a lot of other great informed people in Bigger, Stronger, Faster, the documentary on steroids. And so I'm just very blessed that my practice has morphed. I do miss those days in 100 Center Street for sure in many ways. Um, but most of my practice now is federal cases. I think I told you in court, I think I've counted that I've practiced law or been involved in the defense of steroid and related cases in 40 different federal courthouses. It might even be more now,
Well,
spread out
that's the
across
cool
the
thing is
country.
you've become so sort of known for this and sort of hyper niched for this that you are literally the guy. Like, we might be sitting both in New York, but if someone gets in trouble in California, they can call you. And basically, you might have to co-counsel or whatever with boots on the
Right.
ground. But the point is you're the guy that the big guns call in when they get popped for something like this, and I think that's why I'm so excited to have you, but it's also such a specialized area of law. I deal, criminal law in general touches drugs often, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. Like we deal a lot in substance issues and substance use and abuse. I'm interested to know your thoughts on why performance enhancing drugs are illegal, because it's kind of like it's counterintuitive in a way, because it's kind of the opposite. We think of drugs as something that has a deleterious effect on
Mhm.
one's abilities and causes people to rob houses to get money for the drugs and do all kinds of other illicit things. Like we think of drugs as this sort of negative component. When we talk about performance enhancing drugs, I mean, even that term, performance enhancing, like can you shed any light on why are these drugs illegal? Like what's the policy behind that? What's the idea behind that?
So there's a great quote from a former um, prosecutor from San Diego who once said, "Nobody ever knocked over a liquor store for anabolic steroids," right? So you don't have the same association with, societal urban decay or people laying in an alley and not showing up for work or anything like that. But the story of how steroids became criminalized as controlled substances doesn't get told very often, and most people don't know it. And the secret of it is that in 1988 there was the Olympics in Seoul, Korea, and a Canadian sprinter by the name of Ben Johnson became the fastest man alive, and he ran the 100 meters, broke all the world records. beat the American, Carl Lewis,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
tested positive for anabolic steroids. And before that, there had begun to become some whispers that in sports, people were using these performance enhancing chemicals to get an advantage over the people who were not using them. So there was this equitable
Hmm.
issue that was arising. And then when Ben Johnson beat the American, the sports journalist world went absolutely crazy. The United States Congress responded by holding a bunch of hearings in the late 80s. Interestingly, the DEA, the American Medical Association, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the FDA all sent representatives to say steroids don't belong in the Controlled Substances Act
Hmm.
for the kind of reasons we just talked about. But Congress wanted to get steroids out of sports. And their
Hmm.
solution to doing that was to simply oh, got a call coming through. And their
Hmm.
solution to do that was simply to I don't know, damn, I should have turned off my
Okay.
there
No
we go.
worries.
We can edit that out. Um, so Congress wanted to get steroids out of sports, and their solution to do
Hmm.
that was to criminalize them. But it's interesting because, it's almost like the tail wagging the dog,
Yeah.
because the percentage of people who are using steroids to cheat in sports, in drug tested sports, is a minority. The
Hmm.
overwhelming majority of people who use anabolic steroids for non medical reasons are using them for cosmetic reasons.
Hmm.
They're using them to look more fit or jacked, who
Hmm.
want people who want a better looking body, who want a six pack, who want a bigger chest, who want a stronger bench press. And we live in a very vain society for sure, and every drug has side effects. And so certainly steroids outside of a medical context, and certainly without any supervision or monitoring or review for contraindications before the use, is not good. We don't want to encourage people to use drugs, in a self-help kind of way. But the risks and the dangers were secondary to this idea of cheating, of people getting a leg up on each other in sports. And it's ironic that most of my clients through the years, and I've represented athletes accused of
Right.
doping, and I've represented, professional athletes of various kinds on allegations of cheating in sports. But the vast majority of my clients and the vast majority of the population who are being arrested for anabolic steroids, those who do get arrested, are really gym rats, are people who want to look better. Maybe
Hmm.
they're insecure about their body. Maybe they want to go beyond what nature intended. But I've always said that there's a great analogy to Botox and liposuction
Sure.
and
Or
fillers.
now the
And
GLP ones and all that. I mean,
100%. Yeah, we
about that.
celebrate those
Yeah.
things, even though there can be medical issues, but for some, it's just vanity.
I mean, a lot of people are the Ozempic and all that are just, going for a weight loss kind of thing. Are
Correct.
are there like I remember being at 100 Center Street and there would be units of the prosecutor's office that were, designed to be out there, narc units that were out there looking for drug cases and street drugs and street crime. Are there units of the federal prosecutor's office that are like looking for that's the other thing I'm wondering. I mean, how much are we spending? How much effort are we spending in America to find gym rats that are using steroids?
Right. So I don't think that there's a huge push at this point
Mhm.
to get the users, although I've represented people who were personal users of steroids. Let's say a guy orders a package of steroids from China or from
Mhm.
Thailand, and this was very common probably 20 years ago. Now the market has changed, and it's mostly people who import the powders, make them into injectable
Oh, wow.
products here in the United States, and then sell them on social media. But back
Wow.
years ago, they were mostly importing finished product. And
Okay.
so steroid users are pack rats. It's a very different profile from the crackhead who goes out, buys some crack, gets high,
Mhm.
gets sober, goes out and gets some more crack, comes back. So a steroid user, steroids are used typically in cycles. So it's a pre-planned period of weeks or even months of use. And sometimes it can be very complicated, titrating doses with polypharmacy and different, a whole variety of different stacking of steroids. And so they will often purchase enough so that they can make it through the whole cycle.
The
So
whole cycle.
suddenly the guy imports 1,000 tablets of steroids, and I've actually seen local police saying, "Oh my, we've got a big time." They're looking at him as if it's 1,000 tabs of ecstasy, but it's
Right, right.
not. This is one cycle, and so I was involved in a lot of those
That's
cases,
interesting.
and I've been an expert on cases
It's
involving
interesting
what is
because so
personal
much,
use.
and yeah, I was going to say, because so much of the law and sentencing guidelines and all that is really about weights and whether things are for personal use. So that's a very interesting legal component to all this, is
Right,
that personal use is actually like a lot as opposed
right.
to, an eighth or a quarter of weed as it used to be. I'm dating myself probably, but now, but now it's a bag of gummies or whatever.
Right.
But the point is like, that's an interesting legal issue that arises. A lot of times legislators, they make laws without thinking necessarily about the day to day, and then the law itself has to kind of catch up.
100%. And
Yeah.
and I've seen, I don't see as many personal users arrested. When law enforcement does go after steroids, it's typically for the underground labs, the guys who are making it and selling it, and sometimes making a lot of money out of it. And I've represented people who've made millions of dollars
Mm-hmm.
in trafficking in steroids. But you occasionally do get a car stop where there's a gym bag filled with steroids. It's a guy's personal use. It's a controlled substance, and
Right.
so he's getting charged with that. Or I've seen the girlfriend or the wife who's disgruntled for whatever reason, and
Yeah.
calls up the police and says, I'm in the, she's maybe in the process of divorcing him or getting him out of the house or whatever,
Right.
and suddenly she turns over his steroid stash, and there's an arrest there. So I've seen that, but mostly it is people who are importing the raw powders from China,
Mm-hmm.
usually to a remailer who has nothing in the house, so that there can be a claim that I didn't order this, I don't know anything about this. Once it comes into the country, then to sell it, to send it to the cook, who then esterifies the steroids. And look, I've represented people who are underground chemists, lab guys, who are fastidious and meticulous about quality
I
control,
was going to
and
ask about that
and
to
so
see.
that's phenomenal. Still wouldn't in any way condone buying something that was made by somebody in their kitchen or basement and injecting it into your muscles, but I've also seen those who were not very fastidious. So I'll get, like, in federal discovery, I might get videos that were taken of the scene of the lab during the execution of the search warrant. And you'll see the cat walking over the
Oh my God.
various beakers, and you're saying to yourself, oh my God, somebody is injecting this into their body. I've always said that, certainly we don't want to encourage people to, to use drugs without a medical reason. But on the other hand, I think the controlled factor, criminalizing steroids, really did a lot to disconnect the medical community away from steroids.
Mm-hmm.
Steroid users are less likely to go to doctors and tell their doctors about what they're doing. They're more likely to go to the black market and buy substandard products. So I think that the law probably made steroid use more dangerous than it would have been if the Congress had just left it alone.
Yeah, and created a whole black market, and that's outside of taxes and everything else as well, right? I mean, it's something that could have been taxed and part of the country's revenue as well, I would
It's
imagine.
funny, you'd think we would have learned from alcohol prohibition
Right.
that if there's a demand, there will be a supply. And if you cut off the legitimate demand, what happens? You get a black market supply, and it's usually worse. it was Al Capone and bathtub
Sure,
gin and all of the things that were
sure.
worse than the original. And I think we started to realize that with marijuana at some
Yeah.
point and starting to roll it back, but we haven't really done that with steroids, which is kind of ironic.
It is ironic, and it's hard to see the sort of public policy wisdom of it because it doesn't cause the street crime and the broken windows idea. It's not part of that. So it's hard to see, I don't know. It's maybe just was a runaway train from the, or, from the
Sports,
get.
from the
Yeah, from
sports side.
sports. But it's hard to see the sort of wisdom of it. Can you speak to, I mean, I know you're not a doctor yourself, but just, having been in this field for as long as you have, like, for someone like me who is not fit nor jacked, what is, well, I'm a mushy mom of four. What is
Oh,
what is an anabolic steroid exactly? Like, how does it work? What is it?
sure. So all anabolic steroids, well, when we say the word steroid,
Yeah.
steroid's a very broad term. Estrogen is a steroid,
Prednisone.
cortisone, prednisone, grandma's, prednisone tablets. Those are
Right.
all steroids. So
What about growth?
anabolic.
And there's growth hormone too, that, like,
So that's a little
kids
different.
want
We can talk
right.
about that too. But for steroids, all anabolic steroids are more accurately called androgenic anabolic steroids. So it's a combination. Those are the two components of the type of steroid that's used for physical enhancement. And what that means is the anabolic means muscle building. So
Mhm.
it enhances protein synthesis and makes your muscles bigger and stronger. And the androgenic is sort of a virilizing, masculinizing, because
Mm.
testosterone is sort
Interesting.
of the granddaddy of all anabolic steroids, and it's present in all of our bodies. Every man, woman, and child has it. And it's really what makes masculinity in the human species, right? So you have this dual component of it, which is why women who use anabolic steroids, anabolic androgenic steroids, may have some side effects of virilization, which
Mhm.
more so than men because it's so far into the female body. So when you take anabolic steroids, you get these positive effects, at least of enhanced muscle building. The problems with them is that every drug has side effects, right? And very often the danger of a drug and side effects is the dose. So the
Mm.
more the dose, the greater the potential negative effects. And some people who use anabolic steroids want the maximum physical enhancement, and so they accept the maximum risks, and there are risks to the heart and to potentially the liver if it's oral steroids. Injectables don't really affect the liver that much, but orals do. And so there's some greater possibility of stroke and heart attack, especially at higher levels. Plus, when you take anabolic steroids, you shut down the body's natural biofeedback loop. Says, hey, I've got all these circulating androgens in my bloodstream. Let's shut down. And so the testes kind of go on vacation. They go out to the
Mm.
Caribbean and relax for a while in the sun, which causes some other problems, including potential infertility issues, temporary, possibly permanent in some rare cases, as well as other side effects that come from it. Testosterone also metabolizes in the body into estrogen to some degree, so that some men can get a puffiness around the chest, which is like an estrogenic, weird estrogenic reverse effect. Also, one of the metabolites of testosterone is dihydrotestosterone, which is a more harsh chemical. So you can sometimes see guys who use a lot of steroids can get some acne, especially on the back and on the face. So there's certainly cosmetic side effects and some potentially serious side effects, mostly dose related. Again, encouraging the medical context for all of this would be a lot better than
Right.
sending
Somebody
people
to
to the
the
black market and
right.
buying it from big Joe on Instagram, right?
And you always hear about, like, roid rage and all of that. Is that
Mhm.
a real thing? I mean, I remember in high school, we used to, like, guys would get into fights, and I'm from the West Coast, and people would be, would be like, oh, they're roid raging, and that's why they were getting in these, like, crazy fights. I mean, is that a real
Yeah.
thing? Because, I mean, even as we're talking about potential legal problems, it would seem to me that legal exposure, certainly for possession, as you pointed out, certainly larger exposure for someone, who's in a lab creating or transporting, that kind of thing. But then I would imagine there's also kind of like this trickle down exposure where maybe you're seeing more DV and domestic violence things and fights. I mean, or is that just myth?
So there's research that shows that there's a very small percentage of steroid users who seem to have some psychiatric effects, hypomanic behavior
Mm.
at high doses, usually a dose of over 1,000 milligrams a week, which is probably 10 times 5 to 10 times what natural replacement of your own body's levels would be. So again, high dose related, but that's a very small percentage.
Oh, really? So it get that, because that gets played up a lot, I
It
think.
does, well, yeah. Well, the media will always play up. Media
Mhm.
plays up roid rage and
Yeah.
plays up teens using steroids.
Yeah.
So, and whenever I hear from journalists, they're usually looking for something about those two things. And what I say is, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but most steroid users are not teens. Most of the non-medical steroid users are people in their 20s, 30s, and
Yeah,
40s
expensive.
who want to look better. Yeah. And in terms of roid rage, it's kind of rare. And even the psychiatric experts who've talked about it say that it's largely a media created myth. Now, can testosterone affect certain behavioral aspects? It can. It can make people a little bit more aggressive, more assertive in some people. Testosterone is linked to status seeking behavior. That's probably the best way to
I'm
describe it.
shocked to hear that.
Right. So, and that's true in all species.
Mhm.
So it's funny if you put 5 male monkeys into a cage, okay, they will quickly create a hierarchy so that the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in pecking order.
Mhm.
If you take that third monkey, and they've done this experiment, if you take that third monkey and you inject him with a boatload of steroids, right? He will become much more aggressive, not to 1 and 2, but only to 4 and 5,
Hmm.
because it's following pre-existing social patterns, but just makes him more assertive to those, but he doesn't challenge the higher ones. So it's much more complicated than just this crazy kind of rage. A lot of people in the steroid community will say that steroids will typically make most people more of what they were. So if
Or
you were a-hole
right.
at 180 pounds and now you're 240 pounds, you have a lot more weight to
You're
throw
just going to be a
around.
240-pound asshole,
Yeah,
right?
yes, right. You'll be a bigger asshole than you were before, right? So, but if you're not that way, and obviously I know literally thousands of steroid users from years, and I find most are not that way. Most are people who are most steroid users, if you look at the demographics, most are people who are gainfully employed, higher educated than the average nationally, very often in stable relationships, many married,
Hmm.
who are doing it purely because of maybe the same sort of insecurity that makes somebody get Botox or
Right.
liposuction or something like that.
Right.
We live in a very, especially with social media, we live in a very appearance conscious society. And so steroids are kind of just, another facet to that. I like to say that social media put steroids on steroids
Yeah, yeah,
because,
for sure. And it
you
creates
know,
whole worlds and communities. And, whereas maybe someone wouldn't have known how, like when again, growing up in high school, I think the people that were doing it or looking for it were maybe going to Mexico, crossing the border that way. Now you've got literally an entire world is open to people. And I think that's probably,
at your keyboard. Yep.
yeah, and it's probably good and bad. I mean, it's probably good in the sense that at least if you're, at least there's people to talk to and to create some sort of, like you said, cycles and getting all that information. On the other hand, from a criminal standpoint, there's probably a lot more in writing. It's probably not great. That's probably not.
Yes.
I'm just thinking at like the criminal defense attorney that probably a
Sure.
lot more evidence out there
Yes.
than there
Yes.
was when guys met in
Yeah.
a garage and had a weightlifting in their You know,
Right.
in the
Yes.
backyard.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's not, most of my cases are largely documentary in nature,
mhm,
because there will be payment processor records, or there'll be emails, or there'll be orders, or there'll be packages. It's not like the, back alleys of
right.
some, heroin, street
But that's
heroin
probably
sale.
harder for you though. Like that's from a defense standpoint, that's
Sure.
probably tougher. I mean, anything with, more evidence is problematic for us. Are you seeing people get real time for this stuff? Like what's
So
the
I
legal?
try to avoid that,
Well, of course, not if you hire Rick
knock
Collins.
on wood, I've had just an amazing track record of avoiding,
But they're looking for it is the point.
minimizing.
You're having to really
So
fight.
there are federal sentencing guidelines that
Yeah.
apply, and if you have, depending on the volume of steroids, it ascribes, as you know, to the guidelines to a particular range of months in federal prison.
Mhm.
The federal volume cap for steroids is 60,000 units. So that
Okay.
if you have let's say you have 80,000 units or 100,000 units, it kind of caps at the same place. Roughly, without any other enhancements, you might be talking about 3 to 4 years prison. For somebody with no priors, who's not a leader or organizer, and who doesn't have other exacerbating aspects. But of course, the guidelines are advisory now; they're no longer mandatory. And so, this is the
Good
opportunity for
lawyering.
good
Yeah.
lawyering can make a huge difference. And I've seen situations where because of the nature of the polypharmacy of steroid users and steroid traffickers, very often the people who sell steroids are also selling some different chemicals that mitigate some of those side effects we talked about. Something to block the estrogen, something to limit the DHT
Mm.
conversion, and other things like that. Fat burners, stimulants, and it's not uncommon for agents to really not understand what is a steroid under the legal definition, as opposed to just counting
Mm.
all of it and adding all of that up. And so I've had, in many cases, the opportunity to kind of carve out what the real pot of steroids are. And there's also things called SARMs, which are selective androgen receptor modulators, which are not steroids but are very similar. There's also something called prohormones, which are like steroids. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. So good lawyering from somebody who really knows can
You
make
really
a
have to know your
difference.
shit. You have to know your shit. And if you're lucky, as with Rick, you probably, I'm guessing, more often than not, know more than the prosecutor on the other side, which also I mean, about this very specific issue.
Yeah.
And that
There's no doubt about it. And I get called in as a consultant by other lawyers too, and I enjoy doing that. So I'll get a call from, sometimes the client will know who I am and
Mhm.
will say to his defense lawyer in Arizona, I need you to call Rick Collins. And I'll
Right.
get a call from a defense lawyer who'll be a great defense lawyer, who's, a trial lawyer, knows his or her stuff, but really doesn't know this terrain. And the
Yeah.
prosecutor also has, most prosecutors have never handled a steroid case. So
Right.
the
They don't know it either.
overwhelming majority know very little. And the agents, so you've got the DEA involved, but they know more about coke and heroin and,
Mhm.
and ecstasy and Molly. And you've got, the FDA that sometimes gets involved, but they're limited in what they know as well. So I have the opportunity to kind of come in and really set the table for where the baseline should be of what we're talking about.
And that can make a huge, I mean, that can be the difference between winning and losing, jail and no jail. That makes a huge difference in outcome. And I always say too, like, good lawyers know their stuff, and great lawyers know when to look for, that person who knows about that very specific issue, like you. So that's the time to call in someone like Rick and
Sure.
say, take a look at this case, consult on it, because that can make all the difference for a client. Plus, it gives that person now going forward a whole
Right.
area of law that maybe you hadn't really
Right.
considered, which is cool.
And I play nice with others. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. I
Yeah,
had a
please.
case I was called in on a case very similar to this. Two Texas lawyers, great guys, very knowledgeable, experienced criminal defense lawyers in Texas, had a steroid case with a wonderful gentleman who became a good friend of mine after. And that's kind of cool too, is I'm probably one of the only criminal defense lawyers in the world whose clients ultimately follow me on Instagram and, you know, want to be part of my continuing journey and often become my
That's
friends.
cool.
I see them. I'll be at the Mr. Olympia competition this coming weekend in Las Vegas, where I'll see many past clients and friends. So I really do love what I do. And Rick Collins ESQ on Instagram. Anybody who wants to follow me can do it.
I'll put
But
it in.
so this guy was a great guy, and the prosecutor was looking for an 8-year sentence on a steroid case, which is a heavy hit.
Yeah.
And so the defense lawyers were trying to get him down to a 3-year sentence. And again, it depending on the guidelines and the volume and all of that. So they called me in, and I realized that a lot of what was being counted as steroids under the definition of federal law were not steroids. They were steroid-like, but they were not steroids. And so so I came in initially as a consultant, and then I was asked by the defense lawyers and the client to actually, you know, become main counsel on the case. And it's funny because here you have this New York lawyer in Texas, but it's funny because the prosecutor in the case was not a Texan. He was from DC and he had been sent to Texas. And he didn't get along that well with the Texas lawyers, but we had this sort of East Coast bond.
Yeah.
And he was very smart, a very aggressive, one of the best assistant U.S. Attorneys I've dealt with. I think I'm actually connected with him on LinkedIn now because I was so impressed by him.
Yeah.
And but he was very aggressive, and he wanted that 8 years, and he was fighting. And my position is this should be a probationary sentence because you're wildly overcounting this. And it came down to, you know, these different arguments he would make. He called me up one day and he said, "All right, how about this?" And he gives me this argument of how to interpret the guidelines, and I was like, "Wow, that is."
Pause.
I go, that's brilliant. That's I've never heard that argument. It is brilliant. It's wrong. It's wrong, but it's brilliant, and I'm very
shot,
impressed.
right.
He goes, "Well, why is it wrong?" So we wound up actually calling the U.S. Sentencing Commission hotline to get a ruling on the interpretation of the guidelines. It didn't go his way. He called me up. He's like, "What do you want?" I said, "I want probation." "All right, done." And the guy
Amazing.
got straight probation.
Amazing.
So and I have a lot of stories like that. You know, Rachel, I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do. A lot of the clients that I represent are people who have spotted me in the gym for 30 years, you know? And so to be able to have the skills and the passion and the knowledge to be able to help them in a way that they otherwise couldn't be helped,
Well, I
I'm
think
just grateful.
it also points out, because I say it all the time too, you know, as a private attorney that focuses on DWI defense on my side, you know, you go to Thanksgiving dinner and people are like, "How can you do that? This is horrible. You're defending these drunk drivers." You know, people don't realize how much the system can wrap in it nice, normal, regular people,
Right.
good people. Maybe they made a bad call. Maybe they had, you know, a bad day. Maybe they, you know, bad judgment there, but for the grace of God, right? And they don't realize until you're in it, until God forbid it happens to you or someone you love, you know, you look at it as this outside thing of like, "Oh, you're defending drunk driver." You know, I wouldn't be pro drunk driver if you know, pulled me and put it that way. Nobody's pro drunk driver. But the reality is that most of the people I deal with are good people who either are falsely accused, made a mistake, had a momentary lapse in judgment, but they're good people. And I think whether you're talking about, you know, performance enhancing drugs, or whether you're talking about, you know, deleterious drugs or alcohol, the reality is these types of things in real life, you know, it's not black and white like Law and Order, right? In real life, it's not TV. These are good people for the most part. You know, I can count on one hand the amount of people that came through my office that I couldn't call good people. You know what I mean? So I think that's, you know, something that people on the outside of this don't realize. And maybe they're embarrassed sometimes too, you know, especially kind of in our cases where drugs are involved. Because, you know, they are nice, normal, regular people. They're working people, business owners, whatever. And then they got to call up Rachel or Rick and say, "Oh, I got popped with this or that." You know, I can only imagine that is you know, it feels crappy to make that phone call. So having someone who doesn't judge them, I always say one of my things is like, we don't judge you, we don't lecture you, we defend you, right? Because that's not my place, and most people are nice, normal, regular, good people, in my humble opinion.
Right. And it's a lesson. They learn a harsh
Yeah.
lesson. They pay a price for it. It's not
Yeah.
like, you're walking away. And even a client who doesn't go to jail on a case, it can be life
Hard thing to live,
changing,
harrowing to live through
for
something.
somebody charged with a federal
Yeah.
case. There is no expungement of
Oh,
federal cases, unlike New York State's Clean Slate Act. It rides with you to the grave. Every job application, every mortgage application, it is with you. You can't get out from under it, and it'll affect and impact you. If you did not a single day in jail, let's say I get it all,
yeah.
resolved in a way, and you get straight probation or something, it's still a heavy hit for a lot of people, especially somebody who's never been in trouble before.
And living through, your cases are federal cases for the most part. So living through like the full weight of the US government coming at you, like the US attorneys, it's a very different, people again that aren't in this world don't necessarily know that the feeling on 100 Center Street in criminal court versus the feeling when you walk into a federal court, it's like a whole other ballgame. Very serious, the prosecutors are very professional. I do mostly DWIs in New York and New Jersey. That means that very often it's the prosecutor's first trial, because that's what they give you, right? They're not giving somebody a murder on day one. They're giving them
Right.
DUI. They're giving them DUIs. So like, that's what I'm dealing with. I'm not saying they're not great, wonderful, smart, intelligent, whatever. But you walk into the U.S. Attorney's office, there's like dress codes, and it's just a whole different heaviness to it, I've been on both sides of it, and playing in that field is just a whole other level. And I can imagine for a client, especially someone who's not a criminal and has never been in that experience, just living through that weight
Right.
is life changing.
Yeah, and it affects the family too.
The whole family.
The whole family.
Yeah.
So yeah, and what we do, for all the occasional bashing we take from the general public, I feel real good about it, and I know you do too.
For sure. So I wanted to talk just quickly about the DUI thing, because that is my shtick. Is to say, so
Yeah, sure.
I've never seen a DWI on steroids, a DUI on
Right.
steroids. That's a good book.
Yeah, that'll be my next one.
Good title. But I've never seen a DWI on steroids. And I started thinking, just with the idea of having you coming on, like, is it possible? Could it happen? Right? Because it is a controlled substance, so it falls under this category.
Yep.
Do you think it's possible? I can give you my take on it, but I'm curious, do you think it's possible? Because so they'd have to show that it had a negative impact.
Right.
I think it would be really, really difficult. What do you, if not?
Yeah. Steroids are typically recognized to have minimal psychoactive effects. So it's not like the whole concept of steroid use is not an immediate response. It's not like Coke or Molly. It's that taking it over a period of time builds a physical change rather than any kind of psychiatric or psychological change. But so I agree with you on that. But I'll give you something very, very interesting that was occurring for a period of time in Europe, in some Scandinavian countries. And that was something called muscle profiling.
Okay.
And so you had, apparently parts of Scandinavia were very, very much anti-PED, very much anti any kind of performance drug, and very much anti-steroid. And it came to the point where gyms needed to identify themselves either as drug tested gyms or non-drug tested gyms, so that there would be a smiley face put on the outside of a gym
Very
if they were doing
1984.
if they would, yes, very much scary. If they were doing drug testing, and a frowny. So of course the police knew where to go to get steroids at the frowny gym, right? So there were even reports that they were going through people's cars in the parking lot. So there was a very celebrated case in Sweden where a young, fit and jacked guy was walking down the street, meets a lady. The lady and he have some conversation. She's admiring his trap muscles, his trapezius muscles. And he doesn't realize initially that she's an undercover cop. And she walks him back to the police station where she has him take a urine test under the theory that his traps were so big that it was an indication, similar to a drunk driving analogy, right?
Right.
So if you stop the car, bloodshot eyes, glassy, flushed face, smell of an alcoholic beverage on the breath. These are all indications for probable cause to believe that the person is impaired by alcohol. Well, her position was that these
These physical
external
traits, right?
were probable cause for him to be arrested
Wow.
for drug use, for
Wow.
steroid use. And it wound up that he tested negative. He just had big traps. He was just
Sometimes a big trap's just a big trap.
see that sometimes a big trap's just a big trap.
I,
So
I
so
think
there was a
that,
lot of
yeah,
review of it, of
that's interesting.
whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Is probable cause based on muscularity? Is muscularity a physical attribute indicative of drug use? I think they discontinued the practice after a while, but
Seems a
and I
slippery
don't think
slope
that
to
would ever
think
happen.
about
I
it.
hope that'll never
Yeah.
happen in the United
I don't
States.
think it could. I think, just thinking about it myself, I feel like, I think it would be difficult because, first of all, you've got performance enhancing drug. So part of DWI is showing that a drug has a deleterious effect on your ability to operate a car. So, and I don't think there's anything that I've heard from you today. I don't think there's anything that would do that in these drugs. There's nothing that would make you have your reflexes be slowed or,
No.
anything like that. So I think that would be difficult. I also think, just as a purely evidentiary matter, I think even though it's a controlled substance and it falls into that category, DWIs with drugs are proven with these DREs, these drug recognition experts. And, it's just a sort of a problem with their methodology. They only have like 7 categories
Right.
to choose from. And I just don't think this even would fall into one of those categories. So I actually don't think it would fit into their box. And so now, on the other hand, I do think that, I could certainly see, and I have represented people accused of DV, assaults and things like that, where someone on the other side tried to allege that steroids were part of that. Whether they were or not is another story, but certainly was part of the, prosecutor's theory. I've even had some sexual, before I kind of focused my practice this way, some sexual assault type cases where they tried to allege again that, the steroid use was part and parcel of that.
And I've seen those cases too. Sure.
Yeah. I could also see, like, instead of, I get road rage cases, reckless drivings and, criminal mischiefs. And I could see something like that, maybe, where they tried to allege steroids involved. But a pure DWI, I'm going to say, is going to be a no-go. And it would be very difficult for the state to.
Yeah. And how would they prove it? They'd have to prove that there were these drugs in his system, these steroids in his system, which might have been there from weeks earlier or months earlier, depending on
and which would have enhanced his performance. Like, literally, it's in the title. Not,
yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, there are some claims that even hand-eye coordination in some sports is improved by some of these performance enhancing drugs. So yeah, I don't think they'd be able to do that. Yeah.
Plus, I think it's a limitation of, and it's an interesting point on that DRE program. It's a limitation of that. They claim these DRE guys are, experts in drug involvement with the way individuals act, but it's limited because they only have 7 boxes to choose from. So I think they'd have a problem there. So I know I've seen you on other podcasts, and I know you've got some crazy stories. Do you have like a crazy story you could share with us? Like, what's like one crazy good one that you've got?
All right, so I'll circle back to kind of close where we started at 100 Center Street.
Love it.
Okay.
Lots of crazy things happen on 100.
Oh man, we could share some stories about that, I'm sure. But so there was a judge at one time who, because I was a bigger guy and, coming out of, the bodybuilding world, she would assign me the clients, the 18B clients who had either attacked or threatened their previous lawyers. And she took great delight when I would walk into her courtroom on one case, Ah, Mr. Collins, so good to see you. Step up. I have the perfect client. He's custom made for you. He's sitting in the back. He's in the pens behind the courtroom. I should warn you, he's very, very, very angry. And his case is on for trial next week. And I expect you to be ready. And he's charged with robbery and drug sale and possession of a gun. But I think you and he are going to get along famously. Go in the back and see him. And as you know, you can't turn down really when a judge asks you to accept a assigned case. And so in the back I went, and there he was in the little cage behind the courtroom. And I went up to the bars and I said, Mr. Williams, please step up. My name is Rick Collins. I'm going to be your lawyer in this case. And he was sitting on the bench and he looked at me with his head half cocked for a little while and didn't respond initially. And I'm looking at his paperwork and I see that this is many years ago, I see that he was an undercard professional boxer for Mike Tyson's fights. So that he was a middleweight. But obviously a guy with some skills of who probably lost some of those skills, I guess, got involved in the drug trade and had a unfortunate, slide downward until he's on the street in a drug deal gone bad with a gun. So I said, please step up. I want to talk to you a little bit. So he comes up and he's standing there and he's looking at me and he's eyeballing me eye to eye. And I said, listen, my name is Rick Collins. I don't know what happened between you and your last lawyers. That has nothing to do with me. We're going to start fresh, okay? Your case is on for trial next week. And I'm talking nicely to him about all the things I'm going to do for him. And as I'm talking, he's beginning to look angrier. And he's giving me like his brows are frowning more. And he's beginning to move a little bit closer to the bars. I ignore it and I keep going. I said, we're going to pick a jury and it's going to be a jury of our peers. We're going to choose some jurors we may like and some jurors we won't. If we don't, we'll talk about that and we'll get rid of those jurors. We have certain peremptory challenges and challenges for cause. And I'm explaining the jury process to him. Now he's getting closer to the bars and now he's beginning to shake his head slightly from side to side as he's talking to me and looking angrier than even before. I ignore it. I go into, the burden of proof. They're going to have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? And they need a unanimous jury. If the jury doesn't find you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, we win. And he's moved a little bit closer to the bars, and now he's beginning to bite his bottom lip as he's shaking his head and going back and forth. And now I'm going into, you don't have to testify. No inference can be drawn. I'm trying to do everything to just create some kind of connection with him. So it's not working. And so now he's actually looking at me like he's going to hit me.
Oh
And the
my God.
bars are far enough apart that, I'm wearing a tie. He can get one hand, grab the tie, pull me to the bars. The guy was a middleweight boxer. I mean, he's going to get 20 shots at me, face shots in before I can even pull away. Now, I outweighed him by 40 pounds. If I was in there with him, I was a bouncer for many years. I'd have done a number on him inside, but in this context, I'm dead to rights. So I ignore it. But at some point I can see this isn't working. What am I going to do? So I just intuitively, I made a decision. So I just stopped talking completely. And I just looked at him and I moved closer to the bars and I began shaking my head and I began furrowing my brow and I started biting my lip. And our faces got closer and he was looking at me like he's about to hit me. And I was ready to hit him. And so he knew that I knew that he was close enough to the bars and I was moving forward. And it was probably, Rachel, it had to be about 90 seconds where nobody said anything. And we were just facing each other, just making crazy eyes, biting our lips and shaking our heads at each other. And then after about 90 seconds of that, I stopped and I looked at him. I said, "You want to talk about this case now?" And he went, Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Wow.
And from that moment on,
Wow.
we
Hmm.
got along.
Wow.
We picked our jury. We tried our case. He was acquitted of the robbery.
You were
He was
brothers in
acquitted of the
arms.
drug sale. He got all the B felonies he was acquitted on. He got
Amazing.
the D felony lesser. When the time came, he got sentenced. He tried to hug me in the
Oh my
courtroom.
God.
I'm like,
Yep.
yeah, right. And I said to myself,
Huh.
he wanted to see that the lawyer that was standing up for him against, like what you said, whether it's the government, the federal government, or the state, it's not a fair fight, right?
No.
They've got the
Totally not.
resources, they've got,
Uphill battle.
come on.
Yeah.
So he wanted to know that his lawyer would at least stand up,
Mm.
that wouldn't be afraid, wouldn't back down, wouldn't cave, wouldn't fold, would actually stand up. And if I couldn't stand up to him, how could I stand up to the power of the state? And that was, I think, his
You know
test.
what? That's a beautiful point too. When you're dealing even with difficult clients, sometimes, that is a good pushback, is to say, look, if I don't push back with you, then what chance do you have that I'm push back with them?
Right.
And I think that's a good point. Plus, people they're really in a situation where they're powerless. And sometimes they have to do you have to do something to try to pull that power back. That's fantastic. That's
That's
amazing.
one of many. Yeah.
Thank you.
Someday we'll sit down, we'll go through some more, and I'm sure you have some great
We'll be
ones
on a
too.
bench in a courtroom somewhere and have plenty of time to talk, God willing. Thank you so much. So before I let you go, just say where people can find you. I'm going to put it all in the show notes too,
Awesome.
with links, but just if they're listening to this, where can they find you?
So I'm probably most active on Instagram, so they
And
can
it's a
find me.
great Instagram, by the way. It's not a
Thank you.
boring lawyer Instagram. It's a fun
It's
work.
who I am. It's
Yeah, it's
just, it
awesome.
is who, I am who I
If
am.
you're a
So
lawyer, if you're a lawyer doing marketing like I do, he's a good one to follow for that too, because you see also the whole idea of really letting someone in on your life. People hire those they know, like, and trust, and it's not just you sitting there being a boring lawyer. It's like,
right. Right.
really good
And
luck.
it's just who I am. I put up, and my clients like it too. They like to
Yeah,
see my training videos. They like to see how I'm doing in the gym. I put
yeah.
up some of my acting stuff. I have a
And they
few
can really know you. They can
movies in the
really know you.
hopper. Yeah.
Yeah, not
So I
just
do
like,
that. It's Rick Collins ESQ. I have a website devoted to my federal practice called rickcollins.com. So you can just go there.
that's easy.
My phone number's there. My phone number is on my Instagram as well. If you need me, I'm here. So thank you so much, Rachel,
Thank
for
you so
having
much.
me.
I can't thank you enough. You've been amazing. Your stories are incredible. And yeah, if you ever find yourself fit and jacked for the wrong reasons, only for the right reasons. If you find yourself fit and jacked for the wrong reasons, call Rick and he'll help you get it right.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Rachel.